More countries are suing the Chinese regime over the pandemic. Many wonder about the people inside China. We spoke with a lawyer in Wuhan to find out about the situation on the ground. An internal Chinese report warns Beijing could face a rising wave of hostility over the virus outbreak not seen since the 1989 Tiananmen Square Massacre. Taiwan's successful virus response sets an example for the world, but the Chinese regime is constantly trying to marginalize Taiwan. Today, we take a look at how the Chinese regime seeks to influence local politicians to suppress Taiwan and expand its clout, and why it matters. World leaders seeking to raise $8 billion from nations and public figures in an effort to develop a vaccine and other treatment methods. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. It's been 2 months since the lockdown was lifted in Wuhan, the epicenter of the outbreak. But has it returned to normal? We talked to Zhang Zhan, a Chinese lawyer who stayed there as a citizen reporter. She told us the people in Wuhan are leading a very poor life. Because of the Communist Party's propaganda, most of them believe the virus came from the U.S., and fear of the authorities stops them from probing any further. In China, it's almost impossible to win a lawsuit against authorities because the legal system is under the control of the Communist Party. Ms. Zhang told us she once wanted to help a 64-year-old hospital cleaning worker. The worker recovered after getting infected with the virus but could no longer work. Her husband sadly died from the virus. Her son has an intellectual disability. She has no income or financial aid. Her workplace only gave her about $300 when she left. She could only put pressure on the authorities and hospital to help her going public on social media. But she gave up in the end. Ms. Zhang said it's because she was afraid.
She discovered that defending her rights is very dangerous. She has to use the public to put pressure on the government and the hospital, but she's afraid of offending them. So she did nothing in the end and just let it go. I think this is just like waiting for something to drop from the sky.
Ms. Zhang said fear is still deeply rooted in the minds of the people. It comes from past political campaigns in China where people were persecuted, brainwashed, and even killed.
They've been through the Cultural Revolution. Back then, people had to be careful about every word they said. Fear has completely clouded their understanding. They can't break through the fear they've carried with them since their youth. The Communist Party is so cruel that the fear it instills completely destroys human nature. People lose their judgment, so they won't even protect their family members. That makes it even less possible to talk to them about what's right and wrong. They are completely controlled by the fear of mass killing. They are completely enslaved.
Ms. Zhang met a person who had been sent to a makeshift hospital. Ms. Zhang asked him what he saw there. He refused to tell her and said something even more extreme than the Communist Party's propaganda.
He told me to say things with positive energy instead of negative energy. He said nobody died in Wuhan. Authorities told me that anything I don't see for myself is a lie. So I think no one died in Wuhan.
Ms. Zhang believes this is the result of the Chinese Communist Party's brainwashing.
After being deceived by the media, people think that everything they have was given by the Communist Party. How they think about the party's control of resources, about their own rights, it's all been warped through brainwashing. Not only does it destroy human nature, it also makes people worship the regime, as if the party is the only thing that can save you, and without it, you can't survive. Just like in North Korea, people think without Kim Jong-un, they can't survive.
Ms. Zhang believes two things are needed for change.
Money and power can bring out this kind of evil in human nature. I think only faith can change it. I think people should speak out. A lot of people must speak out together in society.
We previously reported about the serious situation in two cities in the northern province of Heilongjiang, Harbin and Suifenhe. Now another city, Jiamusi, is also in a serious situation, but the local CDC is still reporting 0 cases. Hotels are being used for quarantine and at least one tourist attraction has been closed. Walls were built to separate buildings. Some of the walls have been plastered with cement. And others are being built. Locals are complaining that fire escapes have been blocked. Some neighborhoods have been closed again. The sign at the gate reads "Temporarily closed for epidemic prevention and control." Customers have to wear a mask and have their temperature checked before entering malls. The local epidemic command center used on the front page of local newspapers to tell residents to stay at home during the May Day holiday. Chinese media has reported that all hospital staff in Jiamusi are using the holidays to make sure resources are ready for prevention and treatment. They're checking testing areas, pharmacies, quarantines, schools, factories, and so on. But according to the Heilongjiang CDC, there have been no new confirmed or asymptomatic cases in Jiamusi City. It says right now there are no cases in Jiamusi. All of the province's cases are in other cities. UK Defense Secretary Ben Wallace shared his personal experience battling the virus on Monday. He told Sky News the virus sapped his energy and he lost his sense of taste and smell. Wallace said in a radio interview with the London Broadcasting Company that China has questions to answer on the spread of the virus. He said more transparency and sharing of information between countries would have saved lives. An internal Chinese report warns that Beijing faces global backlash over the virus, just like after the Tiananmen Square Massacre in 1989. People familiar with the matter told Reuters hostility towards Beijing could tip relations with the U.S. into confrontation. The report comes from the China Institute of Contemporary International Relations. Tensions between China and the U.S. are at an all-time high, with deepening mistrust and friction over trade and technology practices, as well as issues surrounding Hong Kong, Taiwan, and territories in the South China Sea. According to officials, the Trump administration is aiming to remove global industrial supply chains from China and could issue new tariffs as a way to punish Beijing. Taiwan's virus response is setting an example for the rest of the world, but it also highlights Taiwan's absence from the World Health Organization because of pressure from Beijing. The Chinese regime's efforts to marginalize Taiwan doesn't stop with the WHO either. Beijing's attempts at influence have reached Western countries too. Today, we take a look at how the Chinese regime seeks to influence American politicians to suppress Taiwan and expand its clout, and why it matters.
Let me read you an excerpt of a letter from a Chinese diplomat. It was China's consul general in New York, sent a letter last month to the speaker of one of your state legislatures. Here's what the letter said in part. It said, quote, "As we all know, Taiwan is part of China. Avoid engaging in any official contact with Taiwan."
The letter urged the state legislature not to congratulate Tsai Ing-wen, who at the time had been just re-elected as president of the Republic of China, known as Taiwan.
Think about that. You add a diplomat from China assigned here to the United States, a representative of the Chinese Communist Party in the New York City, sending an official letter urging that an American elected official shouldn't exercise his right to freedom of speech.
In a speech at a governor's conference in February, Pompeo said the Houston Chinese consulate also sent a letter to a former Mississippi governor last year. The letter threatened to cancel Chinese investment if he chose to travel to Taiwan. He said efforts like this are happening all across the country and not just by Chinese diplomats. He added that Beijing's Overseas Influence Agency played a role as well. Pompeo pointed to a U.S.-China Governors Summit last year, marketed as an opportunity to boost economic collaboration.
It was an event co-hosted by the National Governors Association and something called the Chinese People's Association for Friendship and Foreign Countries. Sounds pretty harmless. What the invitation did not say is that the group I just mentioned, is the public face of the Chinese Communist Party's official foreign influence agency, the United Front Work Department.
In 2018, a congressional commission published a 40-page report about China's United Front Department and its operations. It says, quote, "The United Front strategy uses a range of methods to influence overseas Chinese communities, foreign governments, and other actors to take actions or adopt positions supportive of Beijing's preferred policies," end quote.
It's essentially political warfare / intelligence operations designed to promote the Communist Party of China's strategic objectives.
One organization, the public face of the department, works on developing sister city relationships. According to its website, all 50 states and 227 U.S. cities have ties with China. The partnership between New York and Beijing began as early as 1980. According to a 2018 report by public policy think tank the Hoover Institution, local American governments value these kinds of partnerships for financial and cultural reasons. In contrast, Beijing sees them as political tools, which sometimes have strings attached. The report cites an example where an American city was invited to become a sister city with a town in southern China. One phrase in the agreement appeared to reference the One China principle, which could interfere with American cities' future exchanges with Taiwan. But the agreement was signed anyway at the Chinese side's insistence. The American side didn't want to derail it. Many U.S. states have close trade and investment relationships with China. Take New York, for example. It's one of the top destinations for Chinese investment, and China was the state's second largest trade partner last year. Based on ties like these, the Chinese regime's influence agency and local proxies, including pro-Beijing Chinese American organizations, seek to cultivate relations with local politicians to expand Beijing's clout and foster positive views of the regime. According to former CIA analyst and Chinese espionage expert Peter Mattis, by participating in United Front-sponsored events, American politicians have unwittingly helped reinforce the image of the Communist Party's strength.
What has been the harm of this? One of the biggest ones is that Western politicians have become symbols for the party.
In June 2019, the New York State Senate passed a resolution naming October 1st of that year the state's China Day. October 1st, 1949 was the day communists took over China. Many Chinese people considered an annual day of mourning instead of celebration. Less than 4 months later, on the proclaimed China Day, thousands of Hong Kongers took to the streets to protest. Police fired tear gas, and one protester was shot by a live round. It happened at the same time the Chinese regime was celebrating its 70-year founding anniversary in Beijing. Besides relationship building, the Chinese regime has also systematically analyzed American politicians. Last year, a Beijing-backed think tank produced a report assessing all 50 U.S. governors' stance on China. Each of them was labeled either friendly, hardline, or ambiguous.
Whether you're viewed by the CCP as friendly or hardline, know that it's working you. Know that it's working the team around you.
Pompeo explained that people can still do business with China, but he urged local leaders to be vigilant against the regime's influence efforts, as it has methodically analyzed America's system and learned to take advantage of its openness.
President Trump says Chinese officials couldn't handle the CCP virus outbreak after initially trying to cover it up. He says the regime was embarrassed by it.
In a town hall meeting with Fox News, President Trump said China was embarrassed by the virus outbreak. During the May 3rd interview, he also said that the outbreak definitely started in Wuhan, China. When asked if the disease was purposely put out to the world, he said he doesn't think so, but that it was something that quickly grew beyond the regime's control.
And my opinion is they made a mistake. They tried to cover it. They tried to put it out. It's like a fire. It's really like trying to put out a fire. They couldn't put out the fire.
He explained that the regime let people leave Wuhan despite the danger, while not letting people into China. He also mentioned that the regime didn't let U.S. scientists in to investigate the situation. They let the WHO in only after the situation became more serious. Hours after the interview, Trump sent out tweets aimed at media outlets criticizing his handling of the outbreak. One of the tweets says that he responded to the virus outbreak as quickly as possible based on the information he was getting from the intelligence community. He wrote, "Intelligence has just reported to me that I was correct and that they did not bring up the coronavirus subject matter until late into January, just prior to my banning China from the U.S. Another tweet mentions that he let U.S. citizens back into the country safely, writing that people that were allowed were heavily scrutinized and tested U.S. citizens.
Secretary of Defense Mark Esper today warned of malign interference from countries such as China and Russia. He said some countries are using the pandemic to push their geopolitical interests in Europe and cause divisions in NATO.
Defense Secretary Mark Esper on Monday said Russia and China are taking advantage of the CCP virus emergency to put their interests forward in Europe. He described Chinese efforts to promote Huawei mobile phone network equipment as malign. Esper told Italian newspaper La Stampa that some countries are trying to use the pandemic as a means to invest in critical industry and infrastructure in countries affected by the virus. He was answering a question about Russia and China sending aid to Italy. Esper said there would be a long-term effect on security for countries that allow these investments, and that potential opponents were almost certain to create divisions in NATO and Europe, naming Huawei and 5G as an example of this. He said dependence on Chinese suppliers could make crucial systems vulnerable to interruption, manipulation, and espionage. Huawei and another Chinese firm, ZTE, deny their gear poses a security threat. Both China and Russia offered support to Italy, sending doctors, medical equipment, and face masks to the country.
And in Washington, House Republicans are questioning foreign influence on U.S. campuses nationwide. In a letter to the Education Department, they expressed concern over unreported funding from China and the strings that may come attached to it.
Ranking members on 7 House committees sent a letter to Education Secretary Betsy DeVos on Monday. The letter was obtained by the Washington Examiner. In it, they wrote that they seek a better understanding of the department's efforts to address unreported foreign investment in the U.S. higher education system. They say it's part of the House Republican effort to investigate the Chinese government's propaganda and cover-up campaign surrounding this pandemic. The lawmakers expressed concern about the Chinese regime's potential to indoctrinate American students in college campuses. They added it may also provide China with opportunity for intellectual property theft from U.S. companies and even the government. The lawmakers called it a risk to national security. They also questioned whether places of higher education, which receive federal funding, should be allowed to accept funding from the Chinese Communist Party or related organizations. They cite the fact that the interests of the two nations appear to have diverged. The Department of Education's website shows over $1 billion in Chinese funding on U.S. campuses between 2014 and 2019.
The Deputy National Security Advisor spoke today at the Symposium for U.S.-China Relations. He started his career as a Beijing-based journalist and today critiqued China and its policies. He addressed Chinese viewers directly in Mandarin.
The ups and downs in U.S.-China relations.
U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor Matthew Pottinger discussed U.S.-China relations in depth at the Symposium on U.S. Diplomacy. As a former reporter in China, he knows it takes courage to speak to the press in today's China amid the regime's widespread censorship. In Mandarin, Pottinger echoes whistleblower Dr. Li Wenliang's statement to the press before he died from the CCP virus.
李医生告诉记者，我认为健康的社会应该有多个声音，我不赞成公权力的过度干预。李医生使用的是胡适的大白话。
In 2017, China's Communist Party broke the deal they had signed 20 years earlier. It was supposed to protect Hong Kong's social, legal, and economic freedoms. Pottinger says the Chinese regime uses the law to rule instead of abiding by it.
As 依法治国, which is a little sleight of hand that means using the law to run a country rather than the law being supreme to the men and women who have the privilege of serving in government.
After Hong Kong's government proposed a controversial extradition bill last April, millions of Hong Kongers took to the streets to protest. The British Secretary of Foreign Affairs has said Hong Kong was experiencing its greatest turmoil since its handover. Fears over the Chinese regime clamping down on the territory had led to months of violent protests.
More governors are facing lawsuits and criticism for refusing to ease virus restrictions. Others are dropping the face mask requirements because of tensions that ensued. The U.S. now has more than 1,200,000 CCP virus cases. NTD's Melina Weiskup has more updates.
Yet another state representative is at odds with his governor. California's Devin Nunes publicly announced his criticism of the governor for what he calls declaring war on open space. A similar feeling from some residents who took to the streets after Governor Newsom closed beaches.
I think it's a little extreme. I don't know. I feel like the beaches and the water shouldn't be closed, but...
2 more counties in California are opening businesses today, ignoring governor's orders. And another governor facing a lawsuit. In Maryland, a Republican delegate, along with residents, are attempting to sue the governor for overreaching orders. In the suit, the delegate says, police tried to stop him from speaking at a protest Saturday by telling him the governor has his sights on you. Business people there are facing the tough realities of a closed-down state.
We went from 35 employees down to 5. We had to lay off pretty much everybody.
I'm kind of at the end, you know what I mean, of what I had saved. I'm just burning through everything now just to pay my bills.
In other states, face mask requirements are stirring up trouble. Ohio isn't making people wear masks anymore. The governor removed the order before it went into effect, saying it went too far. A city in Oklahoma is also ending the rule. This comes after some store employees were threatened with violence for enforcing the requirement. Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
Now, an update on New York. The governor says there's hope in the air as virus numbers in the state continue to come down. 1 million people have now been tested for the virus in the state, and over 300,000 of them have tested positive. The good news is that less than 10,000 are currently hospitalized with the virus, and fewer people are being admitted to the hospital every day.
New York is seeing fewer and fewer cases, hospitalizations, and deaths. Less than 10,000 are currently hospitalized. Compare that with the peak in mid-April, which saw nearly double that number.
You see that curve coming down. You see that mountain that we went up. Now we're on the other side of the mountain.
And New York City, the worst hit area in the state, is seeing less hospital admissions, under 100 yesterday.
There's a little more hope in the air because we've seen some real progress.
Governor Cuomo says tracking how fast the virus is spreading in different areas will guide the reopening strategy. Some parts of the state will reopen before others.
If upstate has to wait for downstate to be ready, they're going to be waiting a long time. So analyze the situation on a regional basis.
He says regions can start to reopen on May 15th if they have a comprehensive plan for doing so. In phase 1 of reopening in New York, construction, manufacturing, and retail using curbside pickup will be the first to start up business again. Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
And the governor yesterday announcing that New York and 5 surrounding states are teaming up to buy medical supplies locally instead of relying on China for supplies. And over the weekend, video of New York officers cracking down on a group of people drew criticism from the mayor and the police commissioner. The NYPD says the group was violating social distancing orders. NTD's Miguel Moreno has more on the investigation.
This video circulated on Twitter over the weekend. The NYPD says officers on Saturday were trying to break up a group of people who were violating social distancing orders. But the actions of one officer drew a firestorm of criticism. Look. He ain't even do no. Mayor Bill de Blasio called it unacceptable and said an investigation of the incident was underway. Overall, though, he said that was a rare incident and commended most New Yorkers for following the social distancing guidelines.
Again, this one incident is troubling, but there's been thousands and tens of thousands of interactions between police officers and civilians over the last weeks that went very well, where the NYPD went and made sure that people were practicing social distancing.
The NYPD says this suspect took a fighting stance after being told to leave, which led to his arrest. The officer has also been put on modified duty. In total, 3 people were arrested and charged with disorderly conduct, among other charges. Today, the police commissioner also said the NYPD could do better, but emphasized that this is just one inappropriate incident out of many successful encounters. Over the weekend, officers issued at least 100 summonses to people violating social distancing orders. Miguel Moreno, NTD News, New York.
Discord about church services during the pandemic continues. The U.S. Department of Justice sided on Sunday with a Virginia church where a pastor was fined for holding a 16-person service. This after a district court there turned down the church's request for relief. Now, the Department of Justice is filing a statement of interest in favor of the church. Lighthouse Fellowship Church held a 16-person service on Palm Sunday. It followed social distancing rules, but the pastor was issued a criminal citation for holding it. The Justice Department statement points out that other gatherings are allowed under the governor's order, like lawyers' gatherings in a conference room. One assistant attorney general says, for many people of faith, exercising religion is essential, especially during a crisis. The CCP virus pandemic appears to be easing in some parts of Europe, but it's getting worse in India and Russia.
People around the world are starting to take advantage of looser lockdown measures. Health experts are warning of a potential second wave of infections as people head outdoors. They say more virus testing is needed. Italy reopened parks and public gardens from Monday. The country reported the lowest number of deaths since a national lockdown began in March, on March 10th. Like Italy, Spain reported fewer new cases. And Belgium is relaxing its lockdown measures from Monday, too. But India is seeing a rapid rise in new infections. Lockdown continues for 2 more weeks, but with some measures lifted, construction workers and self-employed people return to work in New Delhi, one of the country's virus hotspots. In Russia, new reported cases rose past 10,000 for the first time. New Zealand marked a significant moment on Monday with no new cases, prompting Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern to consider restarting travel to and from Australia. Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson is set to announce potential lockdown lifting plans this week. But with the UK still reporting hundreds of deaths a day, it's unclear yet when the lifting may take place.
And a university in Germany has concluded that the real number of infections is likely to be much higher than the number of confirmed cases. On the bright side, of all the players in one of Germany's top soccer leagues, very few tested positive.
Researchers at a German university have concluded that the true number of the country's infections is likely to be 10 times higher than the number of confirmed cases. The report serves as a reminder that some people don't show symptoms but can still transmit the virus. Germany's professional soccer league has tested over 1,700 people, of which only 10 have tested positive. This week, Britain will trial a new virus tracing program on the Isle of Wight. The process includes asking citizens on the island to download a smartphone app. That's in addition to traditional ways of tracing those who have come into contact with a patient. The Austrian army is calling in 2,000 members of its military reserve. They'll be assigned to border protection checks. This marks the first time in the history of the Austrian Republic that the country has called in non-active parts of the army. They had to undergo virus testing before taken into the bases. And in Turkey, hundreds of sheep took advantage of the lockdown to stroll and graze through a deserted city. A video posted online shows a huge flock following a shepherd through empty city streets.
World leaders today announced an effort to raise $8 billion for developing a vaccine for the virus. The U.S. decided not to participate.
In an effort to raise $8 billion for research into a virus vaccine and other treatments, world leaders kickstarted a pledging marathon.
In an interconnected world, none of us is safe until all of us are safe.
Although the virus first appeared in China, the country was only represented by its ambassador to the EU. The U.S. decided to halt funding to the World Health Organization on April 15th, amid questions surrounding its handling of virus information. U.S. officials also decided not to join the pledging effort. The EU and Norway each promised to give $1 billion, while Germany will provide over $500 million. Donations promised earlier this year are already included in the sums. Many leaders stressed that the vaccine, once created, must be available to everyone.
We need to develop, produce, and deploy them to every single corner of the world. And we must ensure that they are available and affordable for all.
Some said it shouldn't be reserved for rich countries and that it shouldn't belong to any one country. But French President Macron said that those who invent it will be paid fairly. The $8 billion target is only an initial figure. Britain will hold an online donor summit on June 4th.
Here at China in Focus, we dedicate ourselves to bringing you truthful, unbiased reporting. Don't forget to subscribe for the latest updates, and see you tomorrow.